Good morning, Keller Williams. This is Lorraine Bennick, your compliance officer, and today we're going to talk about reaching compliance and getting paid at closing. This is part one. You will need to search out part two to get paid at closing and learn all about the commissions. So let's get started with compliance. First thing you're going to have to do is create your opportunity, and you do that by logging into agent.kw.com. You want to click on the little people symbol, which is known as contacts. Once you click on the contact, you want to open a contact that exists or you want to create one. And then you will click on opportunities in the top right. This box shows you what happens when you click on create opportunities. You'll see that some of these boxes have little red asterisks beside them. Those are ones that you normally would have to fill in, but a few of them are already filled in for you. Like the Market Center is always going to say Houston Premier, and the owner is always going to be the person who is creating this opportunity. So those things you will not need to choose, but your opportunity type you will need to choose. That could be a listing as it shows here, or a closing, or it could be the landlord's lease listing. There must be either, if it's a lease, you must choose landlord in order to get the correct checklist. There is also a tenant opportunity type, and that is if you have just the tenant on a lease. So you remember, there are 4 different types: listing, closing, landlord, and tenant. The other thing that you must change is down here at the opportunity phase. It says cultivate. I believe that command now will automatically change this to active, but I want you to be aware of it. When you change it to active, this will also change the opportunity stage here, and you will need to change that to something else. Usually, if I change it to active, I put it in the opportunity stage negotiate. That means we're negotiating toward a contract. So once I've created the opportunity, it goes to the very first page of that opportunity, and that is the opportunity details. There are several things you need to notice here. If you click on this little pencil besides the red arrow here, if you click on the little pencil, then you're able to edit this box. And in this box, you might want to put the contract date or the closing date. The more information you have here on general information, the easier it is when you go to do your commissions, because more things pull in. It's also easier when you go to DocuSign, because it'll pull more information over to DocuSign for you if you have more information in this opportunity box. The other thing I want you to be aware of is the property box and the little pencil right here. Please, please, please never forget to click on this pencil and add the address of the property that is either being listed or is being sold, is being listed as a lease, or your tenant is getting. When you set up a buyer file, you may not always know that property, but as soon as you do have the address, go and put it in here. Without that address, it makes it very difficult to find your file, because we search by either your name or the property address. But if I go to your name when I'm searching and it pulls up 10 of your files and none of them have an address, I don't know which file to open. So make sure that you are putting addresses on all your files. Command is going to follow that address in the opportunity. So make sure there's an address there for us to find. Now, the second tab after the details is going to be your documents tab. When you go to the Documents tab, you get to choose the appropriate checklist type. And understand, once you've chosen it and added documents, you can't change that selection. Technically, you can, but you're going to lose every document that you put in there. So don't. Let's not change it. Let's choose the right one the first time. When you go to listings, the choices that you will have are residential, new construction, commercial, unimproved property, and residential condominium. In the buyer, you're going to have the same choices. For a landlord, you're only going to have two. You're going to have the residential lease listing or the commercial lease listing. And for a tenant, you're either going to have a residential lease or a commercial lease. It's very important that you choose the correct opportunity type because each of these checklists are designed for that particular type of opportunity. If you look at a residential checklist, it's a very, very long list. But if you're looking at new construction, there are only 5 or 6 documents that you are required to have. So it makes a big difference. If you have a condominium, you are going to be required to have the condominium resale certificate. So if you choose residential, that's not one of the things that's on the list. So it's very important that you choose the correct type of transaction. Okay? Then you're going to click Start Your Transaction to connect the opportunity to DocuSign. In DocuSign, you're able to add documents according to the checklist type for the opportunity. When you're looking at that, I want you to understand there are 2 different things you'll see. You'll see required, which means you must submit that document, and you'll see conditional, which will mean you may or may not have to submit it based on whether it applies to the file or not. I'll give you an example. Your contract is always a required document. We have to have the contract. But is there a referral on it or is there not? If there's a referral, we have to have the referral form and a W-9. So those conditional documents become required documents. Is your property in an HOA? If it is, then the HOA addendum becomes a required document. But if it's not, then the HOA addendum is not required. So that is what conditional means. It depends on what applies to your particular file. And once you've created your documents in DocuSign, you can pull them in to Command and put them in the placeholders. Or if you have documents that were signed another way, you can pull them in from your computer if they're saved to your computer. If the documents you're adding are not on the checklist, there are 3 little dots you can click on under Start a Transaction, and you can choose Add Document. It will then ask you to name the document, what type of document it is, and then you'll be able to load it from your computer or from other sources. Once you've done all of this, your documents are in there. You submit to the MC for a file review. Understand, our broker has a rule. Within 3 days of signing a listing agreement or executing a contract or a lease, you must submit to the Market Center. That does not mean your file has to be compliant. It does not mean you have to have all the documents in there. If you have a listing agreement, whether it's for a lease or for sale, load it into your opportunity and submit it because I need it within 3 days. If you've executed a contract or you've signed a lease, add that to your opportunity and immediately submit it so that we get it right away. That will stop the clock. However, if you wait until you have all the documents and everything's perfect, you will exceed the 3 days and you will be fined $25 for turning in the file late. I really don't want to apply your $25 fine. So please, immediately hit submit to send the documents to me for review. Let's take a look at some of those things we just talked about. Up here, you'll see this was the details where we went and we clicked on adding information and adding the address. Over here are our documents. we chose a residential listing. I'm sorry, it's cut off right here, but this is a residential listing. So it gave us this checklist. And on this checklist, the very first item was a distribution authorization, or a DA. You don't ever have to fill this placeholder in. We do that for you. Melanie and I, or your MCA and your compliance department, work together in order to send them a compliant file so that they can create your DA and add it here. Once it is added, because you're compliant, your commissions tab is done, everything is perfect, then you can take and download and send that to the title company before your closing. Now, let's look at some of the things that are on here. In the residential listing, it is required that you add the MLS showing the status change. So, if this property were not listed on MLS, you could leave me a comment and tell me this is not on MLS. Maybe it's a FSBO. Maybe the people simply do not want this on MLS. I need to know that. So there is a place where you can leave me comments, and I will show you that in just a moment. Okay. Your executed contract, how do I add it? Well, you can click on Browse right here, and you can either do it manually from your computer or hit this little drop down, and it will give you choices of where you can pull that file in from. These three dots right here, this is what I was talking about when I said you can click on those. There are a couple of different choices, one of which is Add Document. When you add a document, it will add it to the end of the checklist. So you just scroll down, and you would get to the end of the checklist here, and that's where that new document would be. So let's talk about what a compliant file would look like. A compliant file has all the required documents in their placeholders. So you put the contract where it said executed contract, you put the MLS where it said MLS with status change, you put the seller's disclosure where it says that I need a seller's disclosure. Each document is separated, so there's only one document in the placeholder. Unfortunately for me, sometimes you put the entire package of 125 pages in each and every placeholder. The problem with that is I have to find the one document I need. Let's say this was a lease, and they sent it to you all in one bunch like that. So you uploaded it into the amendment regarding rental flood disclosure. You added everything in there. I have to scroll through the entire lease applications, the MLS, all of the documents until I find this one document in order to evaluate it to see whether it's compliant or not. By the time I've gone through all of the placeholders, I have reread every single document, every single page, many, many times. Please separate your documents. Up here on these three dots, if you click on that, one of the choices is split documents. Always split your documents so you can put just the MLS here, just the contract here, just the third-party financing there. Always split your documents. There are manual ways to do that as well, but this one is provided right inside of command for you. Each document is completed, initialed, and signed by both parties. Some documents don't require initials. Some require initials on every single page. Some just require the signatures. Some have no blanks whatsoever other than signature blanks. So go through each of your documents. Make sure there are no blank spaces. Make sure all the questions have been answered. That every page that needs to be initialed has been initialed. That every place that needs to be signed, both by the buyer, the seller, or the agent, has been signed. I often see general notices to the buyer or seller where they signed it, but the agent didn't. or the agent didn't put the broker on the line above their signature, which would be Keller Williams Premier LLC. So make sure that you are completing them, initialing them, and signing them by all parties. Again, agents have signed in all their required places. All addenda mentioned in the contract are in this file. I say that because in the contract you said there's a MUD, but I don't find a MUD on the checklist. I will send you a message that says you're missing the MUD. So make sure that any addenda that's mentioned in the contract is there in your file. All required notices are present. That's another thing. I'm sorry, the MUD is actually a notice. An addenda would be like the addenda regarding special flood areas, or the HOA addendum. Make sure that all of them that are mentioned in the contract are actually present in your opportunity. The MUD or the PID were signed before executing the contract. I will check the date. It's okay if it's the same date, because a lot of times people will send you all of it at one time. Here's the MUD, here's the contract, here's all of it. And your buyer goes through and signs it all. But you need to be reminding them that they need to sign the MUD before we execute the contract. If it is not signed, it gives the buyer the additional ability to get out of the contract all the way to the closing date. So make sure your MUDs and your PIDs are signed before executing your contract. The MLS printout containing pictures. Why on earth would I want pictures? Well, this is why. In your listing, if you have all the pictures there, you get a buyer, you've now got a closing, and you get to the closing table and they say, oh, wait, we did the walkthrough and there was a chandelier in the dining room that is no longer there. We're not going to closing till you put the chandelier back. Well, if we have your listing pictures and it shows there was no chandelier in your listing, then you have a way to prove what was there in the beginning and get out of that situation. But if we don't have your pictures, we can't prove anything. So please do your MLS printout containing all pictures. Your CMA is initialed by your client. A CMA must be done on every single transaction, whether it's a listing, a closing, a lease, a sale. It doesn't matter. You must have a CMA. You must have presented it to your client. If your client says, I don't care, I don't want the CMA, you need to say, is it okay for me to write on here that I presented it and you didn't want it? So that's all you have to do is write that on there and then put that one in your transaction. Otherwise, it needs to be initialed by your client just to say, yes, you presented it. If there is a survey present, there must be a signed and notarized T47. You cannot sign it without being in front of a notary. This is a document that requires notarization. So if they give you a survey with no T47, it is not acceptable. The contract actually says that you must present the survey and the T47. It must be signed. It must be notarized. This cannot be done at closing. The title company does not regulate this. TREC and the contract do. And the contract specifically says that you must have the survey and the signed affidavit, the T47, within a prescribed number of days. If you do not receive it, then it goes on to explain that the seller, at the seller's expense, will provide the buyer with a brand new survey. So please pay attention to what your contract actually says. And last, a compliant file was submitted within 3 days of signing the listing agreement or executing a contract. This applies to the leases as well. Now, back to what I said. If you need to communicate with us, your leadership team, Then click on the add comment. When you do, use the @ symbol and select a name so that it will send that notification directly to the person that you want to talk to. When I said that if it's not an MLS, I can waive that requirement. What you would do is click here on add comment @ Lorraine. It will pull up my name. You can click on that, and now it will come directly to me, and you can say, this is a FSBO. It was never an MLS, or whatever else you need to tell me. Sometimes there are different circumstances in a transaction that you may want to let me know about. Sometimes I have agents who say, I'm just stopping the clock. I know I need a lot of documents. That's perfectly fine. Anything you need to communicate to me, that is where you do it. And now it's time for our break. You have completed part 1 of the Reach Compliance and Get Paid at Closing. Again, please go on to part 2 to learn how to do the commission tab and when to submit your commissions.